Thank you everyone for attending this meeting, our first virtual meeting to discuss mosquitoes in the Saratoga Beach area. I have a quick agenda up here in front of you. We went through a little bit of the privacy and process for Zoom, and Area C Director Grieve will do a welcoming. At that stage, we'll move on to discuss the service boundaries, the AAP, some general process and information around that, which is the alternative approval process. And we'll have a quick break there for questions. And then we'll move into what we're all probably here for, is the mosquito highlights and the study highlights, as well as just an overview of what the control program looks at a very high level. And then mostly this is a good opportunity for people to ask questions. And as I alluded to before, a good spot to ask those questions is in the chat area. And then we'll try and manage questions also by raising your hand at the end of the meeting. So with that, I'll hand this over to Director Grieve.
Well, thanks very much, Doug. Yes, my name is Edwin Grieve, and I have the great privilege of being the Electoral Area Director for Plunge Black Creek, Area C in the Comox Valley Regional District. I'm going to start off by, of course, acknowledging the fact that we are doing this business on the traditional unceded territory of Comox First Nation. I guess everybody's pretty familiar by now with Zoom. We're all zoomed out. So again, thank you for zooming in and not zooming out. This is the Saratoga Mosquito Management Service virtual open house. I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank Sambra for their help in arranging this session today. Tonight, we're here to discuss the new proposed Saratoga Mosquito Management Service and the upcoming alternative approval process. To begin with, I want to provide with a little bit of background here on how services work in regional districts. Our current Comox Valley Regional District offers approximately 99 different services for the region. They range from something as small as, say, as a one street light to service the neighborhood, right up to something like our solid waste management, which actually includes the Strathcona Regional District as well, and serves about 110,000 people. The CVRD collaborates with its municipalities to provide cost savings for cross-jurisdictional services. The CVRD also includes members of municipal councils and the electoral area directors who determine direction and approve all the projects and expenditures to the best interests of the residents involved. Under the Local Government Act, each service exists in a silo, a standalone silo, and they have their own defined service area, their own budgets, their own revenue sources with grants, reserves, debts, and administration, etc. But unlike municipalities, we lack the ability to actually transfer funds around. So whatever you pay for is whatever you get. So it's the services that come back to the people. So residents can move forward with this Saratoga Mosquito Management Service. And the only people that will benefit from the services are the people that participate in this service. To get there, we are looking at an alternate approval process. And that's a selected method that's approved by the ministry for electoral areas to consider a service. I think Doug's going to do a little presentation right now. He's got a little video on how this all works. Is that right, Doug? Okay, so I'll throw it over back to Doug. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Director Grieve. And as a reminder, Doug DeMarzo, General Manager of Community Services. I think I introduced myself prior to the recording.
Many initiatives, such as borrowing money for projects or establishing new regional services, need public approval. In these cases, the CVRD conducts a public assent process, like a referendum, a petition, or in some cases, an alternative approval process. P, to gain support for the initiative before it moves forward. When using an AAP, the CVRD advertises its proposed action in the local newspaper and provides at least 30 days for voters to submit response forms indicating their opposition. If less than 10% register their opposition, the board can choose to proceed with the project. If more than 10% submit forms, the CVRD board must obtain approval to move forward by way of a referendum, or it can choose to abandon the initiative. An AAP is issued as an alternative to a referendum because it's less expensive to residents to complete, and it's an important gauge of public approval. An AAP typically costs up to $5,000 to complete versus $60,000 for a referendum, depending on the area to which it applies. As part of the COVID-19 Finance and Administration Response and Renewal Plan, the CVRD will be streamlining most of its AAPs to once a year in the spring. This singular, unified AAP will save money, streamline efforts, and ensure clear, consistent messaging regarding the process. In certain cases, where timing is crucial, or if there's a high level of community focus required, an AAP may be brought forward separately throughout the year. For more information on alternative approval processes, please visit comoxvalleyrd.ca/AAP.
Thanks for joining us today in the online community update. The CVRD team, representatives, and staff have made it a priority to share regular, ongoing updates.
Hopefully that's done there and everyone can now see the agenda screen again.
No, Doug, I think you need to share your screen again.
Oh, yeah. There we go. Thanks, Christy. I forgot to press the share button twice. So moving ahead, part of the AAP process is looking at the service boundaries. So Director Grieve alluded a little earlier to the service. If you fall within this service area, this is the AAP area. So it's basically the southern boundary is Seaview Road, and the south property is on Miracle Beach Drive. The west boundary is essentially the old Island Highway, flanked by the north is Oyster River, and of course the ocean to the east. So if you're within that boundary, this is one of the services that you can potentially be looking at having in the future if the AP is successful to deal with mosquitoes. As such, through the alternative approval process, the max amount we've looked at in our bylaw is for $36,800. And this basically caps the potential spending in the future for basically the next 5 years. And then there's other mechanisms that I won't get into down the road. But that guarantees when it's approved as a bylaw that that's the maximum amount that can be spent. And for example, for the 2022 potential requiring, we're projecting it to be around 31,000 or so. And this results in an estimated residential tax rate of about 0.08 cents per 1,000 of excess value. And based on your neighborhood, which there's 1,083 residents, and based on your house, not necessarily, but for ease of this situation, say your assessment roll bases your house at 500,000, it would mean that you would be paying approximately $39.49 for this service moving forward per year. Back to the AAP, one of the notes from the video is that 10%, and of this service area, 10% of the eligible electors is estimated to be 108. So in simple terms, that means that if 108 people oppose it, it will not pass. So that'll be done through the notices of the AAP, which will be published in the Comox Valley Record, as well as additional notice provided via the CVRD website with the deadlines for electoral response. So the singular AAP process is set to end on July 5th. So it'll open 30 days prior to that, which would be the first week of June. So that's basically the AAP process in a nutshell. Christy, is there any questions in the chat?
I don't see any questions in here yet.
Okay, well, we'll probably move on to the study, which is the 2020 study highlights. And I'll hand this over to Curtis Fadouk from Duca Environmental. And I should note that he's been involved with mosquitoes and worked in this professionally for a very long time, since 1982, in fact. So he has a wealth of knowledge to share with us today, and he'll go through some of the study highlights as we move forward. So over to you, Curtis.
Thanks, Doug, and welcome everyone. My name is Kurt Fadouk. You have a very nice community up there. It's very beautiful. I really enjoyed coming up there last year. We did 4 field visits between April and July. We tried to time them about every 3-4 weeks. We also did some larval sampling when we were there to find out what the larvae were, and we also did some light trapping for adult mosquitoes. Had a lot of help from a lot of residents with their mosquito magnets contributing mosquitoes to us. So we had a tremendous amount of data there that really helped complement what we were doing. As you see here on the chart, Aedes dorsalis is the salt marsh mosquito. That's the predominant larvae that we found when we were looking around. They seem to be concentrated. Obviously, they need salt water. They were concentrated in the driftwood marsh, which is what we've called this area. And it extends from Ken Whittington's all the way back up under the pedestrian bridge till it reaches the headwaters, where it gets filled a little bit by seepage out of the properties up at the north end. There's also a smaller secondary marsh near the Pacific Playgrounds area. As I mentioned, that's where most of the larvae are. We did the light trapping also showed us there's some other mosquitoes around town. So you also have some Culex tarsalis and a few other Aedes. So that leads us to suspect there may be some mosquito development occurring in some of the ditches and stuff, but not a significant amount. What the light trapping did show us was that the predominant mosquito is Aedes dorsalis, and they come from that salt marsh. And you can see there all the purple dots. That's where all the sampling was done. And that's where we found most larvae. And then I believe the blue ones were for adult sampling and mosquito magnets. Aedes dorsalis, they move about 500 meters. So when we did our light trapping, that's why you can see some of these yellow little stars. We tried to take them out from upwards of 1 kilometer from the salt marsh, just to see how far the mosquitoes were moving. And there's definitely a focus is in those areas. Thing that starts the mosquito development is tidal heights. Anything above 4.6 meters measured over at Middle Natch Island. And this summer that can get started. It usually starts late April, and then you have one every 3-4 weeks. And I think that's it. I mean, I wanted a quick speedy review. That's it. Can't think of anything else. That was the gist of it. Definitely the mosquitoes are coming from there. And it's an area that we would need to focus on. We would look to be treating it if the program was underway. Again, try and time that with the tides. Okay, Doug.
Thank you, Curtis. So that really leads us to what the mosquito control program looks. And there's definitely a history here. The issue has been a few years running, as many of you may know, and it's very location specific as defined by your boundaries, as well as Curtis's findings in his studies. So after a few studies with the various recommendations and through the hard work of Sambra and your electoral area director, Grieve, we were able to find a solution to help move the program forward if supported by the community, which is through this mosquito control program, which looks at integrated pest management approach with elimination or modification of habitat, control of larvae through predators or biological larvicides such as BTI. And all this has to be done through a provincial approved pest management plan, which is required. Should be noted, the objective of the nuisance mosquito control programs is to reduce the extent of adult mosquito annoyance, which would affect area residents and visitors alike. This is obviously best accomplished, we feel, through this integrated approach, with not only the focus on larva control initiatives, but also on private property owners taking actions on their own property, which you can find additional information on our website. If approved, additional conversations will be had with other public property owners, such as the Ministry of Transportation, to determine the path forward for the area. So just wrapping it up, because I think the most important part of this conversation is the questions, and hopefully this is a good amount of information for you. The PMP, the Pest Management Plan, which needs provincial approval, is underway. And shortly after this meeting, we'll be able to submit the final consultation. And the ministry has about 30 to 51 days to respond to get that out there. That's obviously a critical portion. We're not anticipating a further delay or rejection, but if it is rejected, it could delay or make us rethink our approach to mosquito management. From continuing on, we still have public engagement plan, which includes more reach out. We encourage you to look at our website updates. And you may have already seen the Electoral Area Director's newsletter where an update was already provided. Moving to the AP process in 2022, well, the AP being in July, if that's successful, we'd only be able to establish the service with a potential implementation in the 2022 budget. But Sambra has submitted for a rural community grant this summer to be considered to get the program kicked off if all these pieces come together. Finally, I should note that the proposed service is very specific to mosquitoes, meaning it's not going to be broadened to apply to rat control or something else down the road. It really only applies to the defined service area, which I outlined, and doesn't currently consider any other resources to be brought in. So with those final notes, I think that pretty much concludes our presentation, and I can open it up to questions through the chat, or Christy can facilitate the questions if you raise your hand. I will stop the share so people can see each other a little bit more. And that's our presentation.
Awesome.
I don't see any questions in the chat yet, so if anyone does have some, please write them in there. I did want to include that in the chat, I did put a link to our website for the mosquito page, and we do post all of our updates on there.
I have a question, if I may.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jason. I just bought a property near the elementary school, Miracle Beach. And then after the fact, then I learned about this mosquito problem, which is kind of unfortunate. I haven't moved into it yet, the property that is. But I also have a daughter who's very allergic to mosquitoes, so hence my concern in being here tonight. I spoke to you, Curtis, I think a couple of weeks back. We had a great conversation. I don't know, maybe you can just remind me or the group in general, just how resolvable is this situation? Maybe you can tell me, just as a newcomer to the community, how bad is the situation? And maybe that's sort of self-evident by the fact we're having this meeting, but also what's your opinion on how resolvable the situation is in terms of getting the mosquitoes? I don't think we can ever eliminate them, correct me if I'm wrong, but to reduce them from what your observations were last year when you came and did some studies.
Yeah, always, as Doug mentioned, we'd never make it zero. I mean, the goal is to suppress those populations, but what we've seen in other areas, when we do treatments, routine treatment, surveying, monitoring, you're diligent about it. You can suppress those populations. So we were finding 100, 150 larvae in a dipper full of water. Dipper is basically just like a soup ladle. So that's a huge amount. And if you were to have, that's 100 larvae per dip. If you were to have one larvae per dip in an area the size of a backyard swimming pool, that's 21,000 mosquitoes. So it's a huge amount of mosquitoes. And what's happening now is we've definitely identified the marsh, zeroed that in as an area that's the producer of mosquitoes. But that's why I mentioned about the adults. There are a few other adult species of mosquitoes, and those may be the ones that may be generated, as you mentioned, you were concerned about maybe some ditches near your property and other ditches. And as I say, a lot of what we saw was flowing. But again, it was a survey that we'd focused quite quickly. We recognized where the mosquitoes were coming from, what was filling the light traps was definitely Aedes dorsalis. So as I see the program maturing, once it's operational, or should it become operational, definitely we'd be treating larvae within the salt marshes, but while we're there, we're also going to be obviously looking in ditches for larvae. And if we find other larvae, we would certainly be looking to treat those. But I think from what we can see from the light traps, it's 90% of the sources coming out of the salt marshes. And that includes the other one up by Pacific Playgrounds as well. And I think to answer your question about being resolvable, I would say yes. Every place else that we do mosquito control programs, and I do them everywhere from all the way up into Yukon. And so I've right from the BC border or American border. So I've seen a lot of different situations, and definitely, I think we can definitely have an impact there, make a difference. But as I say, it's something that you'll need to do forever, unless you can eliminate the site. It's like mowing grass, right? It becomes a maintenance item, but once you get things under control, it's usually quite enjoyable for most people. There'll always be the odd year Mother Nature will teach you a lesson, but most times it's quite well.
Well, if I have a follow-up question, then in the slides, you separate the types of mosquitoes, the saltwater ones from the ones that are found more inland or whatever. Is there, I guess my first question is there a different type of treatment? Are there any differences between the two type of mosquitoes? You know, or are they just mosquitoes? They just bite you in the irritants, and do you go after them differently?
Yeah, there's a bit of difference for sure in the biology of them, but for most people, they just bite, right? You know, for us, between the Aedes and the Culicida mosquitoes, which is what we find, the Aedes are in the salt marshes, saying they'll breed with every tidal height at the beginning and at the other side of it. The other ones are freshwater, and the thing with Aedes dorsalis is because it's a tidal mosquito, you get them all summer. Most Aedes mosquitoes, you just get them at the beginning of the winter, the beginning of the summer when you have snow melt or river flooding. Those Aedes mosquitoes are there, then they're gone, and they overwhelm Mother Nature, definitely. Well, what happens with salt marsh mosquitoes is you're getting them all summer. And the other type of mosquitoes, those Culex and Culicida mosquitoes that I mentioned that use ditches and standing water and permanent ponds, those lay eggs multiple times over the course of the season. These Aedes eggs that are hatching could be upwards of 20 years old. They lay their eggs on the soil Aedes. So that's why if you do something for a number of years, you decrease the mosquito population quite rapidly, because it's like a bank account, right? Nobody's putting money back in, but money keeps coming out every year. Every hatch that comes out, you control it. There's no more adults going back, adding more eggs. And then what you'll get it to is a background level, because you'll never ever treat everything 100%. You're never going to find every pond. And there's also mosquitoes from outside the area that can fly in as well, right? So you're always going to have that influx of mosquitoes. But again, you can certainly reduce to a very small number the ones that are occurring in the salt marsh.
We do have another question here
Sure.
from David O. Is the plan only to use the larvicide, or are there other measures proposed too?
What we would propose to use would be larvicide, the Vectobac, that controls all types of mosquitoes. There's really not a lot you can do in the salt marsh to physically control mosquitoes, but as Doug mentioned, on private properties, there's a lot that people can do. I mean, golf courses can put in fountains, they can put in little baffle bars. Having said that, the golf course, though, at Saratoga Beach does not appear to be producing mosquitoes in the pond. At least it wasn't last summer. But just around people's properties, the emptying of buckets, you know, it sounds like a pretty trivial item, but a bucket of mosquitoes is 50 mosquitoes. You know, you just need one in your bedroom at night when you're trying to sleep, right? So those things can have a really big impact on a very close area. But when you have things like Aedes dorsalis mosquitoes in a salt marsh, there's really not a lot you can do. In the olden days, they used to try and ditch and trench salt marshes. And they did that in Delta for different reasons. They have a salt marsh at Tawasin, and they had ditched it and increased the flow into it because of fisheries concerns. And basically what that did is it ended up increasing mosquito habitat in the end. They did that because I've been doing there, say, for over 30 years as well. And the tidal threshold there used to be 4.5 meters. Well, once they dug out those ditches to let the water in and out better for the purposes of fishes, that's great. But the stagnant waters that occur from horizontal seepage, now they're 200 meters back into the marsh now that are filling with water, because now the water is able to get back that far. So physically, it's really hard to do much. So you're really locked into using something like Vectobac.
Yeah, I think also with the integrated plan, you know, with the ongoing studies and ongoing knowledge, we're also looking to potentially, you know, help the community with bat boxes or other things and those type of methods as well. But I think, you know, Curtis really hit it on the nail on the head here, is the BTI and the larvicide, which is probably the most efficient method of getting to some level of control. But and in our park systems and public lands, we'll do those encouraging uses as well, of trying to eliminate but not modify drainage too much, and make sure we're not putting in any facilities or amenities that are catching or pooling water in the future. So I'll just do one more question off of the chat here, which I don't have the answer to. So the question is, can you tell me, do the resorts on Clarkson pay a different rate as they are different classification of property? I know they will pay into the service, and we'll have to get back to the group on that. And Dean, if you want to, you know, email the community services specifically with that question, or unless we have his email address, Christy, I'm not sure, we can get back to you on that. But unfortunately, that's out of my finance purview with regards to the different rates and how they're classified on the tax, unless anyone else in the audience knows.
Yeah, can I just add something there for Jason? He's concerned about his daughter. The BTI, it seems to be very effective, but we found in our own house, we're right across from the marsh, that we used something called the mosquito magnet. And that comes by that name. It is expensive, but I'm sure that Curtis will tell you that my wife and I probably did the bulk of the mosquito samples from our mosquito magnet. I mean, it changed our life from night to day. It really works. It is expensive. It costs about, by the time you're all finished with the lure and everything, you got to run a propane tank all summer. But it cleared our backyard, and it really helped.
Thanks. I'll look into it. Appreciate it.
Yeah, our hope is that eventually you won't need to use those.
Yeah.
If we can control the adult mosquitoes, that'll have a big impact. I think in a couple of years, you'll notice a difference. But definitely, when you get on the edges of programs, they're definitely helpful. Like you're in a pretty bushy area, it certainly can hurt. And I know a lot of people like to look to natural controls like birds and bats. Again, dragonflies eat a lot of mosquitoes too. There's a lot of other insects that do as well. But the reason you have a mosquito problem is because Mother Nature cannot control it. If you get enough birds and bats to control your mosquitoes, you're going to have a bird and a bat problem because you're going to need too many. As I say, just like a pond the size of your backyard swimming pool, one mosquito per dip is 21,000 mosquitoes. You take a hectare, and that marsh is about 2.5 hectares. So now you're talking 4 million mosquitoes per hectare. You're talking 10 million mosquitoes. And that's one mosquito per dip. That salt marsh has 100 mosquitoes per dip. So you're talking 800 million mosquitoes every 3 weeks. So it's a phenomenal number. And there's just no way any birds eat 300 mosquitoes a day. You're going to need 90,000 birds. So it's a great idea, and definitely we encourage people to do it, but that's why it hasn't worked. You could never have enough natural predators to control it. That's why 80s mosquitoes developed that way. Their whole biological, environmental strategy, evolutionary strategy is to overwhelm Mother Nature. And that's what they do. And then they disappear for 2 weeks, right? And that's how it works. But the nice thing about Vectovac is it's very effective, doesn't hurt any other organisms. It can be used in waters that are adjacent to fish-bearing waters and that may become contiguous to fish-bearing waters. The actual is a variety of Vectovac that's used in fish-bearing waters for control of black flies. So it's a very safe product, and that's the best thing about it. But it'd be nice, of course, if you didn't have to use anything. That would be the ideal situation.
So on the chat, do we have anyone else who wants to ask a question from the floor, or I can answer this, or I can try to answer this question through anecdotal rumor evidence of why does this seem to be a relatively new problem? Up until a few years ago, we didn't seem to have a problem. So we have heard anecdotal evidence that perhaps there was people in the neighborhood that may have controlled that salt marsh through various methods, but we've only heard that anecdotally. And so that's maybe one of the reasons, but there's also land alteration and things happening within that neighborhood that creates more habitat as well.
If I could,
I don't know, Curtis, how do mosquitoes, do you have anything more on how they just kind of get
I was just going to say,
some of the rain events and stuff maybe you can elaborate on?
Well, that's what I was saying. I could definitely speak to what you're saying. I know when we first came up there and we met up with a few of the people from Sambra, the first thing that they told us is the mosquitoes weren't that bad until about 3 years ago. Then they just got horrible. And the first thing I said, not meaning it in a negative way, is somebody has done something. Something has changed, obviously. And then we went there and we talked to people, talked about ditches and new home construction and all that type of stuff. But the sheer volume of mosquitoes that we were being told about, I definitely thought they were coming from a salt marsh or from some river flooding. And when we got in town and we went for a tour, people took us to the new footbridge. And that footbridge was built about 3 years ago, and it replaced, which were a number of small culverts. And those culverts were probably, I'm not an engineer, but they were probably acting as a hydraulic dam. The tide couldn't push through them fast enough to flood on the other side. So now with an open span bridge, that water is free to move up and down, which is great because it allows the tidal forces to do what they're supposed to do. It's a Mother Nature thing. But unfortunately, it allows the habitat now to become flooded and to have water in there that may not have been there in the past. And that's what I believe happened. If what they've told me is true, is that these culverts were replaced with an open span, that's the only thing that's happened in the last 3 years. And that's changed. So I think that's what it is. It's just allowed the water to get up there. And it's not unlike, as I mentioned, in the Delta salt marsh, when they changed the ditching there, they allowed the water to get into it. So I think that's what's happened there. But I mean, I don't think the solution would be go back and throw culverts back in. I don't think I would recommend something like
And then there is a couple more questions here. Bob had two. When would the treatment begin? And then if the treatment was to start immediately, will it overcome the problem for the summer?
As Doug mentioned, we're in the process right now of getting the pest management plan. And Doug's got a few forms and such to sign. The earliest we could have that would be sometime in the middle of April, or worst case scenario, first week of May. I'm just talking about this year now, whether funding exists or not. I'm saying if there's funding, this is what could happen, right? We could start doing treatments probably in late April, early May, and then they would happen every 3 weeks in time, roughly 3 weeks, timed with the tidal heights. So that's basically, and that would be typical of any summer. It's going to be the tides between April and early September that would cause the problem every summer. And that's what the areas we would focus. And when we were in town, of course, we'd put in the effort to go and visit, various properties that people maybe have pointed out, or we would look back through our light trapping and see where the light traps were and focus some little focused surveying on the ditches and stuff in those areas within probably 100 to 200 meters, assuming that the adult mosquitoes are being pulled in from that distance. So we would kind of have some focused efforts now as a part of an operational program, looking for these other point sources that may be generating these other adult mosquitoes. But definitely the problem would still be the salt marshes, what's causing it.
I also see an earlier question that I may have skipped over from Curtis Scoville, who I should acknowledge has been very helpful moving this forward, Representative Sambra, for your community. He asked, in your opinion, is Vectobac the least disruptive option in terms of protecting the natural ecosystem and habitat for other species? Over to you, Curtis, on that one.
Well, of all the choices, the ideal thing would not have to do anything. The only reason mosquito control programs exist is because people need them. Like, it's not something people want, and it's the tree in the forest, right? If it falls and no one's there, no one hears it. Same thing, mosquitoes aren't a problem until people live beside them. And that's what we have here. So the fortunate thing is that we do have a product like Vectobac, which is very safe. It's been used around the world. It's used in the Rhine Valley in Germany. It's used in Australia. It's used everywhere. In third world countries, we don't need to do this, but in third world countries, it's put in drinking water cisterns for people to be able to drink their water. So it's a very safe product. And again, that's why we use it. It's a little bit expensive because it's an organic product. But again, it does the trick. Anything other than any other alternative would be a chemical pesticide. And we don't want to start going down the road of even considering doing adult mosquito control, because then you have concerns with all kinds of non-target organisms and everything else. Every integrated pest management program has BTI as a component of it. And of course, anything that can be done for physical alterations is always important. And then again, there's the cultural things, and the educational and the things that the public can do, right? Between maybe when you build things a certain way, make sure that the ponds are deeper, put in fountains. There's things that can be done that prevent mosquito development, things that might encourage predators to stay in your pond. If you have a self-contained pond, maybe you can throw a few fish in. It has to be self-contained, of course, because you can't allow fish to exit, but having fish in your pond will certainly help to reduce the mosquito populations.
There is a question here about the funding. Again, how will we get the funding to do this? Doug?
Yeah, so again, the funding is through, I went over earlier, the AAP process. And once that's, if that's approved, the funding would be put into a budget each year and put aside for the implementation of the control program. So it's really hinges on that AAP process that's coming at the end of June. If that's not successful, we'd obviously have to, well, I don't know, that's probably it. The CVRD's gone above and beyond what we usually do for a community with response to an insect. And with the support of Director Grieve and Sambra, we've really looked outside the box to try and help you control this issue of nuisance mosquitoes. And if that's not approved, I don't want to speculate too much, but likely it'd be a provincial issue at that point. But I'm sure we'd be back to the conversations of some sort. There's also another note about making a little less flow through the bridge. So again, that comes back to that integrated pest management down the road. And if that's something that we need to look at, then that's something that we could look to our Parks Department to potentially look at. Although the bridge isn't that wide, and it'd be I don't know if it'd make that much of a difference, but
Yeah, we're not,
something we could consider down the road, but I think we have other ways to address it prior to that.
There is just a note here too from Dean Wyatt that they did have a mosquito problem when they arrived back in '96. The same sort of stories were happening around the neighborhood, dealing with things in the swamp, but then they stopped as the problem greatly reduced or was greatly reduced.
I'm Jay Odlifson. I manage Pacific Playgrounds. And I just wanted to express my support for this initiative and also to express some gratitude to Director Edwin and to Curtis Scoville for some leadership on this, and also to thank Dean Wyatt for being the community champion. So I just hope this goes ahead as fast as it can. And on the question of whether businesses pay a different rate, I think in this case we might even be happy to pay more than our fair share. So I just hope that this moves fast. And I guess I expressed my support by not voting. So thanks a lot for all this work done.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you for the couple of meetings you hosted over the last year as well, and for your assistance. With BC Parks, a question has come up there, and I have been in touch with them recently, and I think once and if the AAP passes, we'll continue that conversation with them. They'd have to make decisions not only locally but also out of Victoria. So Erica is involved. If you guys know her, she does live in your neighborhood, and we will continue those conversations with BC Parks, as we would with the school district if need be, as we would with Ministry of Transportation as well. So it's those will continue to evolve over time. And as Curtis does his surveys, or the consultant does their surveys in the future, if those areas are identified, then those conversations will have to ramp up.
There's another one that just came up there, Doug. Will BC Parks contribute to the budget for the control?
I don't want to speak on behalf of BC Parks, but preliminary conversations with them would indicate that they're probably not.
And I'm not seeing any more comments coming up. Just for everyone, I did put my email in here, which I'll do again with the telephone number. If you have any questions, please just email us or call, and we're happy to find out those answers for you.
With that, we have one more new message here. Great, and I think thank you everyone for taking your time this evening, and look for the information around the AAP process in the beginning of June. And we have a lot of information on our website, so please feel free to check that out as it gets updated. And I think I'll just hand the mic over to Director Grieve for any closing comments, and then we will be closing down the meeting. Thank you once again.
Thanks, Doug. And thank you everybody for zooming in and doing the virtual thing. This has been an ongoing issue, I think, since the last 3 years anyway. And just to let you know, we have been working diligently behind the scenes. And as I say, I'd like to thank Curtis and also Sambra, and also the Pacific Playgrounds for helping host a couple of meetings at the preliminary start of this thing. So and of course Curtis Fadouk as well for his wonderful expertise on this. I think we've got a handle on it. All we have to do is just go the extra mile and get some funding and get on top of this, and it'll be one of those things we tell our grandchildren. Thank you very much.
The great mosquito wars.
Thanks. With that, we'll conclude the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.